What's up guys, this is Matt with Flagstaff Camera, and today we're going to talk a little bit about pushing and pulling film, what it means, and how to do it. Let's jump in. So pushing and pulling film is something you hear a lot, especially when you first get into film. You're going to push it, you're going to pull it. What does it mean? In the simplest terms, pushing and pulling film is changing the ISO, so the sensitivity, the speed of your film, right? Reasonably simple. It's a two-step process. You have to, one, shoot your film differently, and two, develop the film differently. And they have to be, you have to do that together. They have to be the same, right? So let's take a roll of Portra 800, right? Classic, high-speed, beautiful film. But you don't want to shoot it at 800 for whatever reason. If you were in a low light situation, you wanted to get a little bit more speed out of it, you would shoot it, say, at 1600. Right? That's a one-stop push. Push because you're increasing the ISO of the film, right? You need to get, you're shooting in less light, you need to get more sensitivity out of it. So a one-stop push from 800 would be 1600. So what you do, you put it on your camera here, you say, okay, I'm going to load up my Portra 800, and we're going to take it from 800, which is the box speed of the film, and we're just going to go ahead and move that all the way up to 1600. That's assuming we're going to use the camera's internal meter. We want it to meter for what we want to shoot the film at, not necessarily the box speed, but what we want to shoot it at, right? So we're going to say, yeah, give me that one-stop push. We're going to pretend like we're shooting it at 1600. That's the easy part. As long as you don't change the ISO on your camera mid-roll, you shoot the whole roll at 1600, because once you do this, you're committed, right? You say, I'm going to push this film, I'm going to push the whole roll, because you can't push part of it, and good, we're shooting at 1600. Shoot the whole roll. Go nuts. When you're done, make sure that it says on your canister, instead of Portra 800, go ahead and just write 1600 on the cassette, right? This makes it extremely clear to whatever lab you're using that you shot this at 1600. Some people will say, oh, I shot it plus one stop, plus two stops, plus four stops. If you calculate that wrong, or if the lab calculates that number wrong, things can, your film won't turn out, right? It'll be it'll be overdeveloped or underdeveloped. We don't want that. Just write the ISO that you shot the film at on the canister and you'll be set, right? So same thing happens if we're going to pull our film. So instead of shooting our beautiful Portra 160 at 160, we decide we want a little lower contrast, maybe a less apparent grain. We're going to pull that film down to 80, right? You don't have to do full stop increments, but you might as well. So we're going to pull that down to 80. So I'm going to take my ISO dial here from 1600 all the way down to 80. That tells the meter of the camera, this is what I'm shooting this at, right? Load your film, shoot the whole roll at 80. Don't change the dial mid-roll. Remember, don't do that. And then when you're done, pull it out of the camera. Go ahead and say, all right, I pulled this roll, one stop, down to 80. If you write the ISO on the canister, your lab can't screw it up. They'll do the calculation. I shot it at 80. They'll figure it out. Sometimes you'll load a roll of film. Like let's say we've got this Kodak 200, right? We're going to load this in our camera. And the last roll I shot was at 80. So I get halfway through the roll before I realize like, these exposures don't really make sense for 200 speed. I can feel something is wrong about this. You double check your ISO dial and be like, oh, shucks. It's set at 80. I'm really shooting 200 speed film. What do I do? Keep shooting. Don't worry about it. Don't change the ISO dial mid-roll. When you finish the film, pull it out, right? Be like, guys, shucks, sorry. I shot this at 80. Right? When you tell your lab, I screwed this up, but I shot it at this, your lab can do the calculations, change the development time, and you'll get what you're supposed to get out of the film, right? As long as you don't try and change it mid-roll, you'll be fine. We see a lot of people come in and say, oh, I shot the first half of the roll at 80, and then I changed it to 200. Well, now you have to pick. either the first half of the roll or the second half of the roll, because you can't have both, right? If you're shooting at two completely separate ISOs. Anyway, so great, you're changing the sensitivity of your film. What does all this do? What does it mean? We find that pushing film has been more common, especially in the digital age where you've got access to just unlimited crazy ISO, right? You can do anything you want with a digital camera. People have been pushing their film more to get higher speeds, 1600, 3200, 6400, big film speed, right? What you end up finding is because you're underexposing and over-developing the film, remember it's a two-step process, you shoot it different, you develop it different, you end up with images that are higher contrast due to the overdevelopment. They typically have a little bit more grain or more apparent grain. Crunchy is the word that I like to use. So I'm a huge fan of pushing film a stop, right? Taking a film like Tri-X 400, shooting it at 800. Or, if you're really crazy, shooting it at 400 and having it developed at 800, right? That's a one-stop push. Gives me a little bit more crunch, a little bit more snap, a little bit more contrast. Love doing that. And I'll push, I'd say probably 75% of the film I shoot, I'll push because I want that grain, I want that contrast. On the other hand, if you're going to pull your film, right, you pull from, say, 400 with your Tri-X down to 200, you'll get slightly less contrast, you'll get slightly less apparent grain. It's still going to look good, it's still Tri-X, it still has that signature. It just is a little bit different. And of course, depending on your camera, you know, if you're shooting in bright sunlight, say, you probably don't want to be shooting at 800 ISO, right? You want to be pulling that down to 400 or 200. So it depends on, you know, the limitations of your camera. Some of these cameras will have crazy shutter speeds and you can do whatever you want. And some cameras are a little bit more limited. You only get 500th of a second or 1,000th of a second. And that makes it really tough to shoot high-speed films, especially if you don't like stopping down below, say, f11. Anyway, yeah, pushing, you get a little bit more contrast, you get a little bit more grain. Pulling, you get a little bit less contrast, a little bit less grain. Sometimes you'll find that pushing and pulling will change your colors if you're shooting color negative. I find that I tend to get a little less saturation and slightly lower contrast when I pull color film. You'll see a lot of people pulling Portra 400 down to 200 or 160. It's an aesthetic, it's an easily recognizable look, and it looks great. If you push Portra, on the other hand, what we tell people is that it can make your colors do strange things. It's not necessarily always predictable. It's not even necessarily higher saturation and more contrast. It's just different. We'll see if we can find some examples, and if we can, we'll throw a couple up, and if we can't, then it's just me standing here with my face. Anyway, that's a quick primer on pushing and pulling film. Remember, set the ISO on your camera. Tell your lab what you shot the film at. If you want to be fancy, say plus or minus 2 stops, but always, always, always write the number, the ISO you shot the film at, on ideally both the cassette and the order form, if applicable, so that your lab knows to push or pull the film for you. If there's any questions, comments, or concerns, leave those for us in the comments section down below. I'm not going to be the guy that says like the video and smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. I'm not going to do it. Anyway, see you in the next video.